15 doctors failed as two wealthy children agonized without a diagnosis. Normal tests, machines running, and no one saw what was killing the twins. When all seemed lost, a simple cleaning woman noticed something everyone ignored. The heavy silence that had taken over Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City was unlike anything Mary Williams had ever witnessed in her 15 years working as a janitor. It was a silence that screamed desperation, that whispered unanswered prayers, and that echoed through the hallways like a continuous lament. In the private wing on the 8th floor, two small hospital beds held what was left of the joy of Edward Miller, the real estate magnate whose empire was worth billions, but who at that moment felt like the poorest man in the world. Anna Claire and Anna Beth, identical 4-year-old twins, had been hospitalized for 2 weeks in a state the doctors were reluctant to call critical, though everyone knew that's exactly what it was. The girls, who just days before had filled the family's mansion with crystal-clear laughter and childish games, were now struggling to breathe, their small chests rising and falling in movements that grew weaker and more irregular by the hour. Mary pushed her cleaning cart through the hospital corridors at 5 in the morning, just as she had every day since she started working there. But this time her 6-year-old daughter, Isabella, was with her, sitting on a bench in the hallway. The school was closed for renovations, and Mary had no one to leave the girl with. Isabella watched everything with curious, silent eyes, accustomed to accompanying her mother when necessary. The hospital always smelled the same, a mixture of disinfectant, alcohol, and something indefinable that Mary had learned to recognize as the scent of hope mixed with fear. But in these specific hallways, there was something more. A subtle, almost imperceptible odor that made her stomach turn, and her mind traveled to places she preferred to avoid. Edward Miller walked the halls, like a ghost, his impeccable Armani suit a stark contrast to his haggard face and eyes red from insomnia and unshed tears. At 45, he had built an empire from nothing, always believing that money and determination could solve any problem. Now, for the first time in his life, he felt completely powerless. 15 of the most renowned doctors in the country and a few international specialists had been called in to treat his daughters. Each one cost a fortune per consultation, but Edward didn't care. He would spend his last dime if it could save Anna Claire and Anna Beth. The problem was that even with all this assembled expertise, no one could explain what was happening to the girls. The symptoms were identical and simultaneous: increasingly weak breathing, oxygen levels plummeting without apparent cause, skin taking on a grayish tone that frightened anyone who visited them, and an accelerated physical decline that caused them to lose weight day after day. The most disturbing part was that all their tests came back normal. X-rays, CT scans, MRIs, blood work, neurological tests. Everything indicated the girls should be perfectly healthy. Dr. August Clark, the most respected pediatric cardiologist in the country, was leaving another medical meeting, shaking his head in frustration. "It's as if they're being slowly poisoned," he muttered to his colleagues, "but we can't find any toxic substance in their systems." Mary overheard these conversations as she cleaned the windows near the conference room. The doctors spoke as if she were part of the furniture, invisible in her faded blue uniform and worn-out shoes that made a muffled sound on the linoleum. To them, she was just part of the hospital scenery, someone who existed to keep the environment clean while they saved lives. But Mary had something that none of those specialists possessed: the painful memory of having seen these exact symptoms before. 3 months ago, her husband John had passed away after a mysterious illness that had started in precisely the same way. He too had slowly lost his breath, his skin had also turned greyish, and he too had undergone tests that revealed nothing conclusive. John Williams had worked his whole life as a mechanic in an auto shop in the Bronx. He was a simple man, 42 years old, who loved watching football on Sundays and always came home with grease-stained hands but a smile on his face for Mary and Isabella. When he started feeling short of breath, everyone thought it was because of the cigarettes he'd been smoking since he was 16. But his decline was too fast and too strange. John began to constantly clutch at his throat, as if something were obstructing his breathing. He complained of a burning sensation rising up his windpipe. The doctor at the local clinic said it was chronic bronchitis and prescribed cough syrups that made no difference at all. When John was admitted to the same Mount Sinai hospital where Mary worked, she begged the doctors to investigate more thoroughly. But a mechanic with no health insurance, admitted through the public system, didn't receive the same attention as a millionaire paying millions for private treatment. John was treated as just another case of a common respiratory illness, and when his condition became irreversible, the doctors simply said that sometimes these things happen. Mary never accepted that explanation. She had spent entire nights by John's bedside, observing every symptom, every change in his breathing, every nuance of his skin color. There was something specific about his clinical picture, something the doctors hadn't seen or hadn't wanted to see. And now, passing by the rooms where Anna Claire and Anna Beth were fighting for their lives, she recognized the exact same signs. The smell was the same. That subtle odor Mary couldn't define, but that made her heart race with panic. The way the girls moved their little hands toward their chests, as if trying to pull something invisible from inside their lungs. The pattern of their shallow breathing, too rapid, as if the air wasn't getting where it needed to go. Mary tried to get a nurse's attention. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I've seen these symptoms before. My husband—" But the nurse cut her off with an impatient gesture. "I'm sorry, but you can't be distracting the medical team. Please continue with your cleaning duties." The janitor returned to her cot, but she couldn't concentrate on her work. Isabella noticed her mother's agitation and asked, "Mummy, why are you so nervous?" Mary stroked her daughter's hair and murmured, "It's nothing, sweetie. Mummy's just worried about some sick kids." But it wasn't nothing. It was the growing certainty that those two little girls were following the exact same path John had. And if no one acted soon, they would meet the same fate. Mary knew that as a simple janitor, her word meant nothing to the doctors. But she also knew she couldn't live with the guilt if she didn't try to do something. Meanwhile, Edward Miller received more devastating news. His daughter's oxygen levels had dropped even further during the night, and even with the support of ventilators, the situation was becoming unsustainable. The doctors started talking about palliative care and preparing the family for the worst. It was then that Mary made a decision that would change everything. She could no longer stay silent. It didn't matter if she got fired, humiliated, or ignored. She would not allow 2 more lives to be lost in the same mysterious way that had taken her John from her. Even if she was just a janitor with no degree, she had something no specialist there possessed: the painful experience of having witnessed this same tragedy before. Mary Williams spent that Sunday night wide awake, replaying every detail of John's last days in her mind. Sitting in the small kitchen of her 2-room apartment on the outskirts of New York, with Isabella sleeping in the next room, she scribbled on a piece of paper all the similarities between what she had observed in her husband and what she was seeing in the twins at the hospital. The notes were simple, written in the careful handwriting of someone who had only studied up to the 5th grade but had studied well. John started with shortness of breath, just like the girls. John's skin turned grey, just like the girls. John's room had a weird smell, just like the smell near the girls. John clutched his throat. Girls do the same. With every line, her conviction grew stronger. On Monday, Mary arrived at the hospital at 5 in the morning, as always, but this time she carried a different kind of determination. She had decided to try and speak personally with Dr. August Clark, the cardiologist coordinating the girls' treatment. She knew it would be difficult, but she had to try. During her morning shift, Mary carefully observed the doctor's schedule. She discovered that he always had coffee in the doctor's lounge at 7:30, alone while reviewing charts. It was her chance. With her heart pounding, she headed to the lounge, leaving Isabella playing with a rag doll in the hallway. Dr. Clark was exactly where Mary expected, focused on a pile of papers, a steaming cup of coffee beside him. She approached timidly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Excuse me, doctor," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I'd like to talk about the twin girls." The doctor looked up, annoyed. He was a man of 58, with neatly trimmed grey hair, expensive glasses, and an expression that showed little patience for interruptions. "You shouldn't be in here," he said, not even bothering to ask her name. "This lounge is for medical staff." "I know, doctor, but this is important," Mary insisted. "My husband died 3 months ago with the same symptoms the girls are showing. Exactly the same. I think—" Dr. Clark cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but I can't waste time listening to layman's theories. We have 15 specialists working on this case. If there's something to be discovered, we will discover it." He paused, looking Mary up and down. "Now please, get back to your work." The doctor's words hurt more than Mary had expected, not because of the rudeness, but because of the complete dismissal, as if her experience, her pain, and her observations were worth absolutely nothing. She left the lounge with tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of anger. That same morning, the condition of Anna Claire and Anna Beth worsened significantly. The girls, who until then could still babble a few words to their father, could now barely keep their eyes open. Edward Miller was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, alternating between denial and despair. "Daddy," whispered Anna Claire in an almost inaudible voice, "it hurts here," and pointed to her throat with a fragile little hand. Edward held his daughter's hand, feeling how cold it was, and for the first time since the hospitalization began, he allowed tears to stream freely down his face. Dr. Clark entered the room at that moment, followed by 3 other specialists. "Mr. Miller," he said in a controlled voice, "we need to discuss some more aggressive treatment options." Edward knew what that meant. Experimental procedures, therapies with low success rates, the kind of treatment doctors suggest when they've exhausted all conventional alternatives. "Do whatever it takes," he said, drying his eyes. Money is no object. But money really wasn't the problem. The problem was that the doctors were still looking for answers in the wrong places, and Mary knew that better than anyone. During her lunch break, she decided to try a different approach. Mary sought out the head nurse, Sandra Davis, a woman in her early 40s who had always treated her with respect. Sandra had worked at the hospital for nearly 20 years and had known John during his stay. "Sandra," Mary said, pulling the nurse into a more private corner, "I need you to listen to me." The nurse noticed the urgency in Mary's voice. "What is it, Mary? You look distressed." "It's about the twin girls. They have the same symptoms John had, exactly the same." Mary began to describe her observations in detail, comparing what she saw in the girls with what she had witnessed during her husband's illness. Sandra listened with growing attention. She remembered John, remembered how Mary had insisted that something was wrong, that the doctors weren't investigating properly. At the time, Sandra had thought it was just the desperation of a worried wife. Now, seeing Mary's conviction and knowing her observant nature, she began to wonder. "Mary," Sandra said finally, "are you absolutely sure about these similarities?" "I am," Mary replied without hesitation. "It's all the same, Sandra. The smell, the skin color, the way they clutch their throats, the breathing. And there's one more thing." Mary hesitated, as if about to reveal something that haunted her. "On John's last day, I saw something strange when he coughed. It was quick, but it looked like something was coming out of his throat. Something that wasn't normal phlegm." Sandra felt a chill. "What kind of thing?" "I can't explain it well. It was dark, kind of sticky. I thought it was a blood clot, but it wasn't red. It was more greenish." Mary closed her eyes as if the memory was too painful. "When I asked the doctor, he said it was normal, that people with respiratory problems expel that kind of secretion." The nurse grew thoughtful. She had seen many cases of respiratory problems over the years, but she had never observed anything like what Mary was describing. "Mary, did you tell this to the doctors treating the girls?" "I tried. Dr. Clark wouldn't even listen to me. He treated me like I was crazy." Mary's voice was heavy with frustration. "Sandra, I know I'm just a janitor, that I don't have the education you all do, but I know what I saw. And if I'm right, those girls are going to die the same way John did." Sandra made a decision that would change the course of the entire situation. "Mary, I'm going to talk to Dr. Clark. I'll say it's an observation of my own, based on experience with other patients. Maybe he'll listen to me." But Sandra's attempt was unsuccessful. Dr. Clark listened politely to her points but dismissed any possibility that a janitor, even with good intentions, could have relevant insights into such a complex case. "Sandra," he said condescendingly, "I understand your concern, but we can't base medical decisions on the subjective impressions of people without technical training." Meanwhile, Mary continued her work, but now with an anguish that grew with each passing hour. She watched the intense movement of doctors and nurses in the wing where the girls were, saw the increasingly desperate expression on Edward Miller's face, and felt as if she were reliving a nightmare. That afternoon, Isabella noticed her mother was different. "Mommy, why are you so sad?" the girl asked, hugging Mary's leg as she cleaned the floor of one of the hallways. Mary stopped what she was doing and knelt down to her daughter's level. "Isabella, do you remember when Daddy got sick?" The girl nodded sadly. "He had trouble breathing and then he went away." "That's right, sweetie. And now there are 2 little girls here in the hospital who are sick just like Daddy was." Mary caressed her daughter's face. "Mommy is trying to help them, but the doctors don't want to listen to Mommy." "Why don't they want to? Listen?" Isabella's innocent question echoed in Mary's mind like thunder. Why wouldn't they listen? Because she was poor? Because she cleaned floors for a living? Because she didn't have a college degree? Or because it was simply easier to ignore her than to admit they might be missing something important? That night, when Mary got home, she made the boldest decision of her life. If the doctors wouldn't listen to her through normal channels, she would find a way to make her voice heard. Even if it meant risking her job, even if it meant being publicly humiliated, even if it meant confronting people far more powerful than she was. Because, in the end, Mary Williams had learned a painful lesson from her husband's death. When you know you're right and innocent lives are at stake, silence becomes complicity. And she would not be an accomplice to another tragedy that could be prevented. Tuesday dawned with an even heavier atmosphere at Mount Sinai Hospital. Mary arrived at work and immediately noticed the frantic activity in the wing where Anna Claire and Anna Beth were hospitalized. Ambulances were constantly arriving and departing, doctors rushed through the hallways with tense expressions, and there was a buzz of worried voices that echoed everywhere. During the night, the twins' condition had deteriorated drastically. Anna Beth had suffered 2 respiratory arrests and had to be resuscitated, while Anna Claire was so weak she could barely open her eyes. Edward Miller hadn't left the hospital since Sunday, sleeping in an armchair between his daughter's rooms, surviving on coffee and anxiety. Mary observed all this as she organized her cleaning supplies. Her decision from the night before was firmer than ever. She had to find a way to make the doctors pay attention to what she had to say. But first, she wanted to confirm her suspicions one more time. During the morning, Mary managed to observe the girls more closely when she went to clean the hallway in front of their rooms. What she saw alarmed her even more. Anna Claire was making the exact same motion John had in his final days. She constantly brought her little hand to her throat and made a pained expression, as if something inside was bothering her. But it was Anna Beth who definitively confirmed Mary's suspicions. During a coughing fit, the girl expelled a secretion that made Mary's heart pound. It was exactly like what John had expelled, a dark, greenish substance with a strange consistency that definitely did not look like normal phlegm. A nurse who was caring for Anna Beth at that moment simply wiped the secretion with a tissue and threw it in the trash as if it were routine. Mary wanted to scream, to grab that tissue and show it to all the doctors, but she knew it would be useless. Who would believe a janitor? It was then that Mary had an idea. If the doctors wouldn't take her seriously, maybe she could speak directly to Edward Miller. The man was desperate, willing to try anything to save his daughters. Perhaps he was the only person in the hospital willing to listen to what she had to say. Mary waited until noon, when Edward usually went out to the hospital garden for a cigarette. It was a habit he had picked up again since his daughter's hospitalization, even though he had quit smoking years ago. The stress had brought back old vices. With Isabella by her side, Mary timidly approached the garden. Edward was sitting on a bench, his head in his hands, the cigarette burning between his fingers without him even noticing. He looked as if he had aged 10 years in the last 2 weeks. "Excuse me, sir," Mary said, her voice soft but determined. Edward looked up, confused to see a hospital employee addressing him. "I wanted to talk about your daughters." Edward frowned, but there was something in Mary's sincere expression that made him pay attention. "Are you a doctor?" he asked, though her cleaning uniform already answered the question. "No, sir, I'm a janitor here at the hospital," Mary said, holding Isabella's hand. "But my husband died 3 months ago with the same symptoms your daughters are showing. Exactly the same." The word "died" hit Edward like a punch to the gut. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Mary began to recount everything she had observed, the similarities between John's illness and what was happening to the twins, the strange smell, the greenish secretion, the way John clutched his throat. Edward listened with growing attention, and for the first time in 2 weeks, Mary felt that someone was truly listening to what she had to say. "Why don't the doctors know this?" Edward asked, when Mary finished. "I tried to tell them, sir, but they won't listen to me. They say I'm just a janitor, that I don't understand anything about medicine." Mary's voice was filled with frustration, but also with an unshakable dignity. "But I know what I saw. And if no one does anything, your daughters will—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but Edward understood perfectly. The businessman was silent for a few moments, processing everything he had heard. His rational, business-minded brain told him not to give credit to the words of a janitor, but his desperate father's instinct told him that any clue, no matter how unlikely, had to be investigated. "How can I be sure you're telling the truth?" Edward finally asked. Mary looked at Isabella, who was watching the conversation in silence, and then turned her eyes back to Edward. "Sir, I have nothing to gain by lying to you. I could even lose my job if they find out I'm here talking to you. But if I stay quiet and your daughters die, knowing I could have tried to help, I won't be able to sleep for the rest of my life." The brutal sincerity in Mary's words touched something deep within Edward. He had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him: money, favors, business opportunities. But this woman wanted nothing more than to prevent others from going through the pain she had felt. "What do you think I should do?" Edward asked. "Demand that the doctors investigate the girls' throats more thoroughly," Mary said without hesitation. "Not just X-rays or blood tests. Something physical is obstructing their breathing, I'm sure of it. It was the same with John, but by the time we figured it out, it was too late." Edward put out his cigarette and stood up. "I'm going to talk to the doctors right now." But when Edward confronted Dr. Clark with the information he had received from Mary, the doctor's reaction was one of absolute indignation. "Mr. Miller, with all due respect, we cannot base medical procedures on the words of a janitor. This woman has no qualifications whatsoever to make diagnoses." "But she said she saw the same symptoms in someone else," Edward insisted. "It wouldn't hurt to check." Dr. Clark sighed heavily. "Mr. Miller, I understand your desperation, but we have already performed every possible test on the throat region of your daughters. If there were any physical obstruction, we would have found it. Then why aren't they getting better? Why are all the treatments failing?" The doctor had no answer for that. Sometimes medicine encounters cases that defy our current understanding, but I can assure you we are doing everything in our power. Edward left the conversation more frustrated than before. On one hand, he had the word of 15 renowned specialists saying there was no physical obstruction. On the other, he had the desperate account of a mother who had lost her husband to identical symptoms. Who could he trust? That afternoon, Mary received news that sent her into a panic. Dr. Clark had reported to hospital supervision that she was interfering with medical treatment and communicating inappropriately with patients' families. Her supervisor, Rita Thompson, called Mary into her office. "Mary," said Rita, a serious woman in her 50s who managed the custodial staff, "I've received a serious complaint about your behavior. Are you talking to families about medical cases?" Mary felt the floor drop out from under her. "Miss Thompson, I was just trying to help. I saw the same symptoms in my husband and—" "Mary, you are a member of the cleaning staff. Your job is to clean, not to give medical opinions. If this happens again, you will be fired on the spot." Rita paused, looking at Mary with an expression that mixed severity and compassion. "I understand you recently lost your husband and may be projecting your grief onto other cases, but you need to stick to your job." Mary left the office devastated, Not just because she had almost lost her job, her only source of income, but because of the feeling of absolute powerlessness. She knew she was right, knew she could help save the lives of Anna Claire and Annabeth, but the entire system was conspiring to silence her. For the rest of the day, Mary worked in silence, but her mind was racing. She observed the girls again during her cleaning rounds and saw that Anna Claire had gotten even worse. The girl could barely stay conscious, and her breathing was so irregular that the monitor alarms were constantly going off. It was then that Mary witnessed something that left her completely horrified. During a routine visit, she saw Annabeth try to cough, and something dark briefly appeared in the girl's mouth before she swallowed it back down. It was as if something physical was moving inside her throat, something alive. Mary ran to the bathroom and threw up. The image she had seen was disturbingly familiar. John had done the exact same thing in his final days, tried to cough up something that seemed to be moving inside him. At the time, Mary had thought it was a delusion from the illness. Now she realized it might be something far more concrete and terrible. When Mary returned to the hallway, she found Edward coming out of Anna Claire's room with red eyes. The man looked like he had reached his emotional limit. It was then that he saw her and approached. "I spoke to the doctors about what you told me," Edward whispered, looking around to make sure he wasn't being overheard. "They said they've already examined everything." "Mr. Miller," Mary said, her voice urgent, "I just saw something you need to know. There is something alive inside your daughter's throat. I saw it moving." Mary's words were like a lightning bolt. Edward turned pale and had to lean against the wall. "What are you saying?" "I don't know what it is, but it's moving in there. That's what's causing the breathing problems, I'm absolutely sure now." Mary grabbed Edward's arm. "Sir, if the doctors won't listen to me, then you have to find a way to make them investigate this today, because your daughters aren't going to last much longer." At that exact moment, the alarms in Anna Claire's room began to blare non-stop, and a medical team rushed to the scene. Edward and Mary stood frozen in the hallway, hearing the urgent shouts of the doctors inside. It was as if time had stopped, and they both knew that it might already be too late for any intervention. The shrill alarm from Anna Claire's room cut through the air like a blade, and within seconds, the entire hallway transformed into a medical war zone. Dr. Clark, followed by a team of 5 nurses and 3 other specialists, burst into the room while Edward and Mary stood paralyzed outside, watching the desperate scene unfold through the glass window. Anna Claire had gone into full respiratory arrest. Her small body lay motionless on the bed, connected to a web of tubes and wires that looked more like an electronic spiderweb than medical equipment. The monitors showed flashing red lines as the doctors worked frantically to revive her. "Prep for emergency intubation," shouted Dr. Clark, his hands trembling slightly for the first time in his entire career. "She's been without oxygen for 2 minutes. Mary watched it all with a broken heart, knowing exactly what was happening because she had lived through the same scene with John. The difference was that this time she knew what the problem was, and this time she wouldn't stand by and watch someone die because of medical incompetence. "Mr. Miller," Mary whispered, pulling the businessman into a more private corner. "They won't be able to revive her like this. The problem isn't in her lungs, it's in her throat. As long as that thing is in there, she won't be able to breathe properly." Edward was distraught, his gaze shifting between Mary and his daughter fighting for her life just a few feet away. "But what can I do? The doctors are trying to save her. The doctors are doing the same thing they did with John, treating the symptom, not the cause." Mary gripped Edward's arm tightly. "Sir, I know this is going to sound crazy, but if you let me into that room, I can try to remove what's blocking her breathing." Edward looked at Mary as if she had completely lost her mind. "You're a janitor. You can't go into a medical emergency." "I know, sir. I know I don't have a degree, that I'm not a doctor, that I could even kill your daughter if I do something wrong." Mary's voice was filled with a determination that came from the depths of her soul. "But she's going to die anyway if she stays like this, and I know what's killing her because I saw the same thing kill my husband." Inside the room, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The doctors had managed to temporarily intubate Anna Claire, but her oxygenation remained critical. It was as if something was physically preventing oxygen from reaching her lungs, exactly as Mary had predicted. "It's not working," shouted one of the nurses. "The tube is positioned correctly, but the air isn't getting through." Dr. Clark was breaking out in a cold sweat. In 40 years of practice, he had never seen a case like this. It was as if there was an invisible obstruction in the girl's airway, something that all the tests had failed to detect. At that moment, Annabeth in the next room also began to show signs of extreme respiratory distress. The monitors in her room started beeping insistently, and it became clear that the same thing happening to Anna Claire was about to happen to her. Edward went into a full-blown panic. "They're going to die. Both of my daughters are going to die, and nobody knows why." He turned to Mary, his eyes filled with tears. "If you really know what's happening, for the love of God, do something." Mary looked at Isabella, who was sitting on the hallway bench, watching everything with frightened eyes. "Sweetie," she said, kneeling down to her daughter's level, "Mommy needs to help those sick little girls. You stay right here, okay? Don't move from this spot." Isabella nodded, even without fully understanding what was happening. Mary kissed her daughter's forehead and stood up, filled with a courage she didn't know she possessed. "Mr. Miller," she said, "you're going to have to get me into that room. Say I'm a specialist, you called in anything, but let me try. Please." Edward was too desperate to think rationally. His daughters were dying, and a janitor was the only person who seemed to have any idea what to do. It was complete madness. But what other options did he have? "All right," Edward said finally, "but if anything goes wrong—" "If it goes wrong, they die anyway," Mary completed. "But if I'm right, I can save them." Edward used all his authority as a wealthy and influential man to force Mary's entry into Anna Claire's room. "This is a specialist in respiratory obstructions I had flown in from another hospital," he lied to the doctors, who were too busy with the emergency to properly question the presence of a woman in a janitor's uniform. Mary approached Anna Claire's bed, her heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode. She had never done anything remotely like this, but her intuition, sharpened by the pain of losing John in the same way, guided her. "I need to see her throat without the tube," Mary said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "For just 30 seconds. Dr. Clark looked at her with suspicion, but the situation was so desperate that he decided to allow it. 30 seconds, he said curtly. "If there's no improvement, you're out of here immediately." When the breathing tube was temporarily removed, Mary could see exactly what she expected. There was something dark and mobile deep in Anna Claire's throat, something that clearly shouldn't be there. With extreme care and using a small pair of surgical forceps from the instrument tray, Mary began to try to remove whatever it was. "What are you doing?" Dr. Clark asked, alarmed. "Removing what's killing her," Mary replied, completely focused on her task. What she pulled from Anna Claire's throat was something that shocked everyone. Present, a dark creature the size of a small slug that writhed in Mary's forceps. "My God!" exclaimed one of the nurses. "What is that?" Mary didn't know what it was, but she knew it was exactly what had killed John. The reaction was almost immediate. As soon as the creature was removed, Anna Claire began to cough and then to breathe more regularly. Her color, which had been almost gray, slowly began to return to normal. "This is impossible," Dr. Clark murmured, watching the monitors show a dramatic improvement in the girl's vital signs. But there was no time for explanations. Annabeth was also in respiratory crisis, and Mary knew the same creature was lodged in her throat. "I need to do the same thing to the other girl," she said, rushing to the next room. The procedure was repeated with Annabeth, and again Mary found an identical creature obstructing the girl's airway. When the second creature was removed, Annabeth also began to show immediate signs of improvement. Dr. Clark was completely stunned. "How did you know that was in there? All of our tests?" "Because my husband died from the same thing 3 months ago," Mary said, her voice filled with both pain and relief. "I tried to tell you, but no one would listen." The doctor turned pale as he grasped the magnitude of what had happened. A janitor had saved 2 lives that 15 renowned specialists had failed to save, but there were still urgent questions that needed answers. "What are these creatures?" Edward asked, looking at the 2 parasites that were now being placed in containers for analysis. "That I don't know," Mary admitted. "But I know they don't just appear on their own. Someone put this in your daughters, the same way someone put it in my John." At that moment, the reality of the situation began to dawn on everyone present. This was not a natural illness. It was something deliberately placed in the victims, a calculated act of evil that had almost cost the twins their lives and had in fact cost John his. Dr. Clark immediately ordered that samples of the parasites be sent for specialized analysis and that the hospital be put on high alert. If someone was deliberately placing parasitic creatures in patients, then there was a much greater danger lurking for everyone there. Edward hugged Mary, his eyes filled with tears. "You saved my daughters. How can I ever thank you?" But Mary wasn't thinking about gratitude. She was thinking about John, who could be alive if someone had paid attention to her concerns. And she was thinking about how many other people might have been victims of the same kind of attack without anyone noticing. "Mr. Miller," she said, "we need to find out who did this, and we need to find out fast, because I have a feeling your daughters weren't the first victims." In the 48 hours following the twins' rescue, Mount Sinai Hospital transformed into a veritable beehive of investigative activity. Parasitology experts were called in from universities in New York and Baltimore. Hospital security technicians scoured every inch of the wings where Anna Claire and Anna Beth had stayed, and Edward Miller hired a private investigation firm to find out how those creatures had ended up inside his daughters' throats. Mary Williams, who for 15 years had been practically invisible in the hospital corridors, now found herself at the center of all the attention. Dr. Clark, who days before had treated her with disdain, now sought her out constantly, to hear every detail about John's illness and death. The change in the doctor's attitude was so drastic, it was almost embarrassing. "Mary," Dr. Clark said that Thursday morning, finding her in the hallway as she worked, "I need you to tell me everything again about your husband. Every symptom, every detail you remember. Now that we know he was a victim of the same thing, any information could be crucial." Mary stopped cleaning the floor and looked at the doctor who just a few days earlier had nearly gotten her fired. "Doctor, are you sure you want to listen to me now? Because on Monday you said I was just an unqualified janitor." Dr. Clark blushed visibly. "Mary, I made a terrible mistake. My professional pride almost cost 2 children their lives. I sincerely apologize." The doctor's humility touched Mary, who had never been one to hold a grudge. She recounted John's story again, but this time with Dr. Clark taking detailed notes of every symptom, every progression of the disease, every peculiarity she had observed. "There's one thing I didn't mention before," Mary said hesitantly. "In his last few days, John was saying strange things. He said he felt something moving inside his throat, that it felt like some little bug was trying to get out. The doctor said it was a delusion from the illness, but now we know he was right," Dr. Clark completed grimly. "Mary, do you remember if John had contact with any strange people in the days before he got sick? Someone you didn't know?" Mary thought for a moment. "Actually, yes. A week before he got sick, a man showed up at the shop where he worked, saying he wanted to hire them for a special job. He said it was urgent, that he'd pay well, but that it had to be done at night, secretly. And John accepted. He did. We always needed the extra money. He left on a Tuesday night and came back very late, saying the job had been strange, but the man had paid in cash, up front." Mary paused, the memory bringing back details that hadn't seemed important at the time. "John said the man was very well dressed, spoke politely, but there was something weird about him, and he had a strong smell of medicine." Dr. Clark noted everything meticulously. "Mary, would you recognize this man if you saw him again?" "I think so. John described him to me several times, said he was a man in his 50s, tall with neatly combed grey hair, who wore expensive glasses and drove a black imported car." At that moment, Edward Miller approached them. The businessman seemed to have regained some color in his face since his daughters began to recover, but his eyes still showed the mark of recent trauma. "Dr. Clark, I just received the preliminary report from the investigators." Edward opened a folder and showed them some photographs. They found evidence that someone was in the pediatric wing using a fake ID badge. The security cameras showed a man walking the halls early Sunday morning, shortly before the girls started showing symptoms. Mary looked at the photos and felt her blood run cold. Even with the poor quality of the security footage, she could recognize the silhouette. That man, he looks like the description John gave me of that strange client. Edward and Dr. Clark exchanged grave looks. "Are you sure, Mary?" Edward asked. "I can't be absolutely sure from the photo, but the height, the way he walks, the posture, it all matches what John told me." Mary felt a shiver run down her spine. "That means whoever killed my husband tried to kill your daughters too." The revelation created a heavy silence among the three. Edward was the first to speak. "But why? What connection could there be between a mechanic and my daughters?" "Maybe it's not about your daughters specifically," Dr. Clark said thoughtfully. "Maybe it's about you, Mr. Miller. John might have been how can I put this? A test run. A way to test the method before using it against you or your family." Edward turned pale. "Are you saying someone used an innocent man as a guinea pig to then attack my daughters?" "It's a possibility we have to consider," the doctor replied. "These parasites don't exist naturally in the United States. Someone had to bring them from another country, someone with specific knowledge of biology and access to specialized labs or breeding facilities." At that moment, Nurse Sandra Davis approached the group with a worried expression. "Dr. Clark, we just received a very disturbing report from the parasitology lab." "What did they find?" the doctor asked. "These creatures are a species of parasitic worm found only in specific regions of the Venezuelan Amazon. They normally live in freshwater fish, but they've been genetically modified to survive in mammals." Sandra paused, clearly disturbed by what she was about to reveal. "The modification isn't natural. It was done in a lab by someone with advanced knowledge of bioengineering." Edward felt his legs grow weak. "Genetically modified. That means... It means someone specifically created these parasites to use them as a biological weapon," Dr. Clark completed, "and chose your daughters as the target." Mary, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke. "But if they managed to do this once with John and now with the girls, it means they can do it again, to other people." The possibility was terrifying. If there was someone out there with access to genetically modified parasites, using them to attack innocent people, then no one was safe. And worse still, if John had been used as a test, it meant the attacker had learned from their mistakes and perfected the method before using it on the twins. "We need to notify the authorities," Edward said, pulling out his phone. "Wait," Mary said, touching the businessman's arm. "Before we do anything official, we need to think about something. This man got into the hospital using a fake ID. That means he knows how the security here works. He might even have someone helping him from the inside." Dr. Clark nodded gravely. "Mary's right. If there's an inside accomplice, notifying the authorities now could alert the attacker that we've figured out what he did. He could flee or, even worse, attack other people before he's caught." Edward put his phone away, but his expression showed the internal struggle between wanting to protect others and wanting to protect his own family. "So what do we do? We stay quiet while this monster could be preparing his next attack." "We don't stay quiet," Mary said with determination. "But we do this smartly. First, we find out who this man is and if he really has someone helping him in here. Then, we set a trap to catch him." Dr. Clark looked at Mary with new respect. "Do you have any idea how to do that?" Mary had spent the previous night thinking about exactly that. "I do, but it's going to require you to trust me again. And this time it's going to be much more dangerous than pulling parasites out of two little girls' throats." Edward and Dr. Clark looked at each other. After everything that had happened, after Mary had saved 2 lives that all the experts had failed to save, there was no longer any doubt about who they should trust. "What are you thinking?" Edward asked. Mary took a deep breath before answering. "I'm thinking of using myself as bait. If this man really killed my John to test his method, then he knows I exist. And if he finds out I'm the one who saved your daughters, he's going to want to silence me before I can identify him." "Absolutely not," Dr. Clark said immediately. "It's far too dangerous. Doctor, this man already took my husband from me. He almost took these 2 innocent children. How many more people will he kill if he's not stopped? Mary's voice was filled with an unshakable determination. "Besides, I'm the only person who can recognize him from the description John gave me. I'm the only link between the two attacks." Edward was torn between admiration for Mary's courage and horror at the idea of putting her in danger. "Mary, you have a young daughter. You can't risk yourself like this." "It's precisely because of Isabella that I have to do this," Mary replied. "I want her to grow up in a world where monsters like this aren't running free, killing innocent people. And I want her to know that her mother did the right thing, even when it was hard." At that moment, Nurse Sandra came running back, her face white with terror. "Dr. Clark, we have an emergency. 3 children were just admitted to the pediatric wing with the same symptoms the twins had." The silence that followed was deafening. The monster had struck again, and this time with multiple victims at once. The chaos that erupted at Mount Sinai Hospital after the arrival of the 3 new victims was unlike anything Mary had ever witnessed. The children, 2 6-year-old boys and a 5-year-old girl, arrived almost simultaneously, brought in by desperate parents who reported the exact same symptoms: sudden difficulty breathing, grayish skin, and a strange odor emanating from their mouths. Dr. Clark immediately activated the emergency protocol that had been created after the twins' case. This time, there would be no time wasted on unnecessary tests. The medical team knew exactly what to look for, and Mary was officially included in the emergency team as a specialized consultant in parasitic obstructions, a title that sounded impressive, but in practice meant they finally recognized the value of her experience. "Mary," Dr. Clark said as they rushed through the hallways, "we need to act fast. If these parasites are the same ones that attacked the twins, we have a very small window before the damage becomes irreversible." Mary nodded, but a different worry plagued her. "Doctor, 3 children at the same time. This isn't a coincidence. This man is escalating his attacks. He's getting bolder." Edward, who had remained at the hospital since the attack on his daughters, joined the group. "I've already had my investigators check if there's any connection between these families and mine. I need to understand what this monster wants." The first child Mary examined was Lucas, a 6-year-old boy whose parents worked at a pharmacy downtown. Observing the child's breathing pattern and behavior, Mary immediately recognized the familiar signs. "It's the same thing," she told Dr. Clark. "The parasite is lodged in the same region as it was in the twins." The removal procedure, which was now documented and had become an official medical protocol, was performed with surgical precision. Mary, working alongside Dr. Clark, managed to extract a parasite identical to the previous ones. Lucas reacted immediately, his breathing normalizing within minutes. The second victim, Sophia, presented a slightly different case. The parasite was lodged more deeply, and Mary had to be even more careful to avoid damaging the delicate structures of the girl's throat. "This one is more developed," Mary observed as she worked, "as if it were placed before the others." "What does that mean?" asked Sophia's mother, a woman who worked as a secretary at a law firm. Mary exchanged a worried look with Dr. Clark before answering. "It means that whoever did this to your daughter is perfecting their method. Each attack is more precise than the last." The third case, a boy named Gabriel, brought a disturbing revelation. His parents reported that the week before they had been approached by a well-dressed man who identified himself as a medical researcher. The man said he was conducting a study on child health and offered a significant financial compensation for Gabriel to participate in a simple and painless medical exam. "You let this man examine your son?" Edward asked, trying to control the anger in his voice. Gabriel's father, visibly ashamed, nodded. He presented credentials that looked legitimate, said he was from a famous university, and he offered $5,000 just for a basic exam. We needed the money to pay rent." Mary felt a wave of compassion for the family. She knew all too well what it was like to need money and be willing to take risks for it. "Do you remember what this man looked like?" she asked gently. The description she received was almost identical to the one John had given months ago. Tall, well-dressed in his 50s with grey hair and expensive glasses. But this time, there was a new detail. The man drove a black car with out-of-state plates and had a physical peculiarity, a small but visible scar on his right hand. Now we have something more concrete to work with, Edward said after hearing the description. I'll have my investigators look for someone who fits this profile. While Gabriel underwent the parasite removal procedure, Mary couldn't stop thinking about the escalation of the attacks. John had been an isolated test. The twins had been the main target. And now there were 3 new victims, attacked in a more systematic and organized way. Dr. Clark, she said when they finished treating Gabriel, this man isn't doing this alone. To get modified parasites, coordinate multiple attacks, and pose as a medical researcher. He has resources and help. The doctor nodded gravely. I agree, and what worries me most is that he's becoming more aggressive. First it was an adult man, then 2 children, now 3. If we don't stop him soon, he'll escalate even further, Mary completed. It was then that Sandra Davis approached the group with information. That would completely change the course of the investigation. Dr. Clark, I just received a very strange call. A man asked specifically about the janitor who saved Mr. Miller's twins. He wanted to know her name, what hours she worked, if she had a family. Edward and Dr. Clark were instantly on alert. What did you say? Edward asked. I said I couldn't provide information about employees, but he was very insistent. He even offered money for the information. Sandra looked directly at Mary. He was specifically looking for you. Mary felt a chill run down her spine. He found out I was the one who saved the girls, and now he's after me. Exactly as you predicted, Dr. Clark said. He wants to silence you before you can identify him. Edward was visibly disturbed. Mary, this changes everything. You can't be involved in this anymore. It's too dangerous. But Mary had made her decision long before that moment. Mr. Miller, this man has already taken the most important thing I had. If we don't stop him now, he'll keep killing innocent people. And who's to say that next time it won't be Isabella? The mention of her daughter made Mary's heart ache, but it also strengthened her resolve. He's looking for me? Perfect. Let's give him exactly what he wants. What do you mean? Dr. Clark asked. We're going to make it easy for him to find me, but this time we'll be prepared. Mary looked at Edward. Can your investigators monitor the hospital's phone lines? They can, Edward replied. They've been doing it since yesterday. Then, when he calls again asking about me, and he will call, you're going to give him the information he wants, but you'll give him information that we control. Mary took a deep breath. We'll say I work the night shift alone, that I always leave through the back door at 6 in the morning, that I live on the outskirts of the city and take the bus home. Dr. Clark shook his head. Mary, that's suicide. You'll be serving yourself up on a platter to this psychopath. No, Mary said with conviction. I'll be serving myself up on a platter for a trap, because you'll be watching me from a distance, and when he shows up to attack me, we'll catch him in the act. Edward was torn between admiration for Mary's courage and terror of the consequences if something went wrong. What if he doesn't come himself? What if he sends someone? What if he has a gun? Then it will be exactly as it would be if he caught me by surprise, except this time you'll be nearby to help me, Mary replied. Mr. Miller, this man has already proven he won't stop. With each attack he gets bolder, more violent. If we don't catch him now, how many other families will go through what we've been through? Mary's logic was irrefutable, even if it was terrifying. Edward knew she was right. The attacker was escalating rapidly, and it was only a matter of time before someone actually died. All right, Edward said finally, but on my terms. My security team will be positioned at strategic points. You'll wear a tracking and communication device, and at the first sign of real danger we abort everything and call for official backup. Mary nodded. I accept the terms. But there's one thing I need to do first. What? Dr. Clark asked. I need to take Isabella to my sister's house in another city. If something happens to me, I don't want her to be alone, and I don't want this monster to be able to use her to blackmail me. Mary's maternal concern deeply touched Edward, who recognized in her voice the same unconditional love he felt for Anna Claire and Anna Beth. Of course. My driver can take you both today. And Mary, Edward paused, searching for the right words. Thank you. For everything. for saving my daughters, for risking your life to protect other families, for being brave when the rest of us were scared." Mary smiled sadly. "Mr. Miller, when you lose someone you love unjustly, you have two choices: become bitter or become strong. I chose to be strong, and I'll keep being strong until this man pays for what he's done." At that moment, the hospital phone rang. Sandra answered, and after a few minutes of tense conversation, hung up with a pale face. "It was him," she said simply. "He wants to meet Mary tomorrow at 6 in the morning at the back door. He said he has a proposal for her that she won't be able to refuse." The silence that followed was heavy with tension and fear. The monster had come out of the shadows and was coming directly for Mary. The question hanging in the air was whether they would be ready to face him when the time came. The early hours of Friday morning at Mount Sinai Hospital were unlike any other Mary had ever experienced. At 4 a.m., she was in the hospital's conference room, surrounded by Edward, Dr. Clark, and 3 private investigators who had been hired to coordinate the operation. Over the past 24 hours, every detail of the trap had been meticulously planned. "Mary," said Richard Carter, the head of the investigation team, an experienced 45-year-old man who had worked for decades in corporate security, "let's review the plan one more time. At 5:50, you'll leave through the main entrance as if you were going home normally. You'll walk around the block and position yourself at the back door at exactly 6 o'clock. Mary nodded, checking for the 10th time the small communication device hidden in the collar of her uniform. "And where will you be?" "I and 2 of my men will be positioned in the building across the street, with a full view of the back door," Richard explained. "Dr. Clark and Mr. Miller will be in the hospital lobby ready to call for backup if necessary, and we have 2 more men circling the area in a car." Edward approached Mary, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "Mary, I still think this is too risky. If this man is really dangerous—" "Mr. Miller," Mary interrupted gently, "yesterday afternoon I took my Isabella to my sister's house in Stamford. She's safe, far away from all this. Now I can do what needs to be done without worrying about her." Mary paused, looking at each person in the room. "This man killed my husband. He almost killed your daughters. He attacked 3 innocent children yesterday. If I don't do this, who else will die?" Dr. Clark double-checked the medical equipment he had prepared. "If anything goes wrong, if he tries to use the parasites on you, we have antidotes and emergency equipment ready. But Mary, at the first sign of real danger, you run. Don't try to be a hero." At 5:40, Mary headed to the designated spot. The hospital's back door was in a quiet area, between the employee parking lot and a small garden that separated the hospital from an office complex. It was the perfect place for a discreet meeting, or for a crime. Mary's heart was pounding, but her determination was unshakable. She thought of John, of how he had been used as a guinea pig by that monster. She thought of Anna Claire and Anna Beth, 2 innocent children who had almost lost their lives because of someone's thirst for revenge against Edward. And she thought of Lucas, Sophia, and Gabriel, 3 children who had been attacked simply to test more efficient methods of murder. At 6 o'clock sharp, Mary was positioned near the back door. The sun was rising, painting the New York sky with orange hues that contrasted with the tension of the moment. For a few minutes nothing happened, just the distant sound of morning traffic and the occasional noise of employees arriving at the hospital through the main entrance. Then, at 6:08, a black car approached slowly. Mary immediately recognized the model, an expensive imported sedan, exactly as John had described months ago. The car stopped about 20 yards from her, and a man got out of the driver's side. He was exactly as Mary had imagined. Tall, well-dressed in his 50s with perfectly combed grey hair, expensive glasses, and a posture that exuded authority and arrogance. As he got closer, Mary could see the scar on his right hand that Gabriel's family had mentioned. "Ms. Mary Williams," the man said, his voice polite but cold. "We finally meet in person." Mary felt a chill, but she remained calm. "Who are you? And what do you want with me?" The man smiled, but it was a smile without warmth, a calculated one. "My name is Dr. Maurice Albright. I'm a researcher in bioengineering from Johns Hopkins University, or rather I was, until Edward Miller destroyed my career and my life. I don't know what you're talking about, Mary said, though she was beginning to understand the connection. Of course you don't. People like you never know the consequences of the actions of people like Edward Miller. Dr. Albright took off his glasses and cleaned them carefully, a gesture that seemed rehearsed. 3 years ago, I developed a revolutionary technology for genetically modifying parasites for medical use. I wanted to use modified organisms to specifically target cancer cells. Mary listened, keeping her eyes fixed on the man as she tried to process the information. Edward Miller was one of the project's investors, Dr. Albright continued. But when he found out the preliminary results weren't as promising as he'd hoped, he didn't just pull his investment. He spread rumors about the research's safety, got my license revoked, had me fired from the university, and made me lose everything. The man's voice was growing more tense, revealing the rage that had built up over the years. Because of him, my wife left me. My children no longer speak to me. I lost my house, my reputation, my entire life. And because of that, you decided to kill innocent people? Mary asked, unable to hide the outrage in her voice. Dr. Albright laughed bitterly. Innocent? Your husband wasn't innocent. He was chosen specifically because he worked at a shop that did occasional work for Edward's company. It was a way to test if my modified parasites worked as a biological weapon before using them on the main target. The words hit Mary like a slap. John had died simply so this man could test a murder method. And the children. What did the children ever do? Edward's daughters were the main objective. I wanted him to feel the pain of losing someone he loved, just as I felt when I lost everything. Dr. Albright paused, studying Mary's face. As for the other 3 children, they were necessary to test the improvements I made to the method. Each attack taught me something new about efficiency and time of action. Mary felt nauseous hearing how this man spoke of children as if they were lab rats. You're a monster. I am a brilliant scientist who was destroyed by a greedy and unscrupulous man, Dr. Albright replied coldly. And you, my dear, have become a problem that needs to be solved. What do you mean? You saved Edward's daughters. You ruined my revenge. And worse, you can now identify me. Dr. Albright put his hand in his jacket pocket. Originally, my plan was to simply offer you money to keep quiet about everything you saw, but after thinking it over, I realized you represent too great a risk. Mary saw that Dr. Albright was pulling something from his pocket, a small glass vial with a clear liquid and a syringe. What is that? A concentrated version of the parasites I used on the children, this time modified to act much more quickly. The man began to prepare the syringe, with precise, rehearsed movements. Instead of days or weeks, you'll have only a few hours before the parasites cause total asphyxiation. Mary started to back away, but Dr. Albright was faster. He moved with surprising agility for someone his age and managed to grab her arm before she could escape. There's no point in screaming, he said, bringing the syringe closer to Mary's neck. At this hour, there's not enough activity around here for anyone to hear. And even if they do, it will be too late. It was at that moment that Mary discreetly activated the communication device hidden in her collar. Dr. Albright, she said, speaking loudly enough for the microphones to pick it up clearly, do you really think you'll get away with this after killing me, after confessing to killing my husband and attacking all those children? The man hesitated for a fraction of a second. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that our entire conversation is being recorded and broadcast live to several people who are very close by. Mary smiled for the first time since the encounter began. And I'm talking about the fact that you just confessed all your crimes to a team of professional investigators. Dr. Albright looked around, finally realizing he had walked into a trap. His expression changed from confidence to panic in a matter of seconds. This was all planned. It was, Mary confirmed. Just like you planned to kill my husband, planned to kill Mr. Miller's daughters, and tried to kill 3 more children. The difference is that our plan was to catch a criminal, and yours was to kill innocents. At that moment, 3 cars appeared simultaneously from different directions, surrounding Dr. Albright. Richard Carter and his team emerged from the vehicles. with precise, coordinated movements, while Edward and Dr. Clark came running from the hospital entrance. Dr. Albright still held the syringe, but he was now completely surrounded. His expression had shifted from panic to a desperate fury. "You don't understand what Edward Miller did to me. He destroyed my entire life. And for that, you decided to destroy the lives of innocent people," Edward said, approaching with clenched fists. "My husband, your daughters, other children, who never did any harm to anyone." "You have no right to judge anyone," Dr. Albright shouted, pointing the syringe toward Mary. "You're a parasite. Who gets rich by exploiting others?" But before he could do anything, Richard Carter tackled him from behind, wrenching the syringe from his hand and slapping handcuffs on his wrists. "Maurice Albright, you're under arrest for multiple counts of attempted murder and for the murder of John Williams." As Dr. Albright was led to one of the cars, Mary finally allowed the accumulated tension to leave her body. Edward hugged her, repeatedly murmuring, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." "It's over," Dr. Clark said, placing a hand on Mary's shoulder. "It's finally over." But even with Dr. Albright arrested, Mary knew that some wounds would never fully heal. John was still dead. The children had still been through terrible trauma, and she was still a widow trying to raise a daughter on her own. However, for the first time in months, Mary felt she could sleep in peace. The monster who had taken John from her was in custody. The families of the other victims would get justice, and maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all this tragedy. 3 months had passed since the arrest of Dr. Maurice Albright, and Mount Sinai Hospital had become a completely different place. Mary Williams walked the hallways, no longer pushing a cleaning cart but carrying a folder of documents and wearing an ID badge that identified her as coordinator of the Patient and Family Outreach Program. The change had begun a week after Dr. Albright's arrest, when Edward Miller approached Mary with a proposal she had never imagined receiving. He wanted to create a program at the hospital that would value the observations of all employees, especially those who had direct contact with patients and their families. Mary would be the coordinator, responsible for training teams and ensuring that no one's voice would ever again be ignored because of their hierarchical position. "Mary," Edward had said on that decisive morning, "you saved my daughters because you paid attention to details that 15 specialists ignored. That can't happen again. I want you to help create a system where every person's experience is valued, whether they have a college degree or not." Initially, Mary had resisted. "Mr. Miller, I don't have the training for this kind of work. I'm just a janitor." "You are not just anything," Edward had replied firmly. "You are an observant, courageous woman who has a deep understanding of how this hospital works and how people feel when they're vulnerable. That's exactly what we need." Dr. Clark had enthusiastically supported the idea. The doctor had spent the last few months reflecting on his own biases and how he had almost allowed 2 children to die because of his professional arrogance. "Mary," he said, "you taught me a lesson that no medical school teaches: humility, and that's something every doctor needs to learn." The program had started small, with Mary training custodial, security, and food service staff to observe signs that might go unnoticed by the medical team. It gradually expanded to include nursing assistants and even medical residents, who now learned to value insights from any source. In her new office, a small but comfortable room on the 3rd floor, Mary reviewed the week's reports. Anna Claire and Annabeth had fully recovered and returned to school. Lucas, Sophia, and Gabriel were also doing well, with no lasting effects from the parasites. More importantly, in the past few weeks, 3 complex medical cases had been solved thanks to observations from employees who would have previously been ignored. A maintenance technician had noticed a strange pattern in the ventilation equipment, which led to the discovery of a structural problem that could have caused hospital-acquired infections. A kitchen worker observed that several patients in a specific wing were refusing a certain type of food, leading to the identification of an undiagnosed food intolerance. And a night security guard noticed that families from a particular neighborhood were arriving at the hospital with similar symptoms, which allowed for the early identification of a dengue fever outbreak. "Every person who works in this hospital has eyes and experience," Mary always said in her training sessions. We don't need a degree to notice when something is wrong. We just need to pay attention and have the courage to speak up. That Friday afternoon, Mary was organizing her materials when she received an unexpected visit. Anna Claire and Anna Beth entered her office, accompanied by Edward, carrying a colorful drawing they had made especially for her. "Aunt Mary!" the twins shouted in unison, running to hug her. In recent months, they had insisted on calling her Aunt, a title Mary wore with immense pride. "Look what we made for you," said Anna Claire, showing her the drawing which depicted a woman in a blue uniform surrounded by smiling children and a large red heart. "It's you saving the sick kids," explained Anna Beth. "And look, Isabella is in the drawing too." Mary felt her eyes well up with tears when she saw that the girls had included her daughter in the drawing. Isabella had returned from Stamford 2 weeks ago and was adjusting well to her new life. With the significantly higher salary Mary now earned, they had been able to move into a better apartment, closer to the hospital and Isabella's school. "It's beautiful, girls," Mary said, hanging the drawing on the wall next to her desk. "I'll keep it forever." Edward watched the interaction with a smile. In recent months, he had developed a genuine friendship with Mary, based on mutual respect and the shared experience of almost losing loved ones. "Mary, I have some news for you. The program we created here is going to be implemented in 5 other hospitals in the state network. They want you to help train the teams." Mary was surprised. "Does that mean what we did really works?" "It doesn't just work," Edward said. "It's revolutionizing how hospitals think about internal communication. You've created something that could save thousands of lives in the coming years." That night, Mary returned home with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in a long time. The 2-bedroom apartment in the North Bronx was modest but comfortable. Isabella greeted her with a tight hug and a flood of stories about her day at school. "Mum," Isabella said as they ate dinner, "today at school the teacher said you're a hero. Is that true?" Mary smiled, remembering how she used to feel invisible. "I'm not a hero, sweetie. I'm just someone who paid attention when it was important to pay attention. But you saved those kids, and now you're teaching other people to do the same." Isabella paused as if choosing her words carefully. "Daddy would be proud of you." Her daughter's words touched a deep place in Mary's heart. John was still present in their lives through memories, the lessons he had taught, and the love he had left behind. His loss had been the tragedy that changed everything, but it had also been what gave Mary the strength and determination to fight for other families. The following Sunday, Mary and Isabella visited the cemetery where John was buried. It was a ritual they kept every other week, bringing flowers and sharing the news of their lives with him. "John," Mary said, kneeling before the simple headstone, "we did it. We got the man who hurt you, and we managed to turn your pain into something that's saving other people." She paused, feeling Isabella take her hand. "I'll never stop missing you, but now I know your death wasn't in vain. It saved other families from going through what we went through." Isabella placed the flowers in the vase next to the headstone. "Daddy, Mommy has a really important job now. She teaches people to pay attention to important things, just like she paid attention when you got sick." As they drove home, Mary reflected on everything that had changed. Dr. Maurice Albright had been sentenced to 25 years in prison for murder and multiple counts of attempted murder. During the trial, he had shown genuine remorse, but that didn't bring John back or erase the trauma of the children he had attacked. What really mattered was what had grown from that tragedy. The program Mary had developed was being implemented not just in hospitals, but in schools, companies, and other institutions, where hierarchy could prevent important information from being shared. "Mum," Isabella said during the ride back, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course, sweetie." "Are you still sad because of Daddy?" Mary considered the question carefully. "I am, Isabella. I'll always be sad about losing Daddy, but I've learned that you can be sad and happy at the same time. Sad that he's gone, but happy for the good things we've managed to build." "Like what?" "Like your new room, which is bigger than the old one. Like my new job, which lets me help other families. Like the friendship we made with the twin girls and Mr. Miller. Like knowing that you'll grow up knowing your voice is important, and that you should always speak up when you see something is wrong. Isabella was quiet for a few minutes, processing her mother's words. So does that mean bad things can turn into good things? Not exactly, Mary explained. Bad things are still bad. Daddy's death was terrible and will always be terrible. But we can choose what to do with our pain. We can let it destroy us, or we can use it to build something better. The following Monday, Mary received a call that moved her to tears. It was from a mother in Chicago whose son had been saved by a nurse who had applied the protocols from the program Mary developed. The child had shown subtle symptoms that might have been ignored, but the nurse, trained to value his own experience and observation, had insisted they be investigated. The result was the early diagnosis of a serious heart condition that, if left untreated, could have been fatal. "Ms. Williams," the mother said through the phone, her voice choked with emotion, "I don't even know how to thank you. Because of your program, my son is alive." When she hung up the phone, Mary allowed herself to cry. They were tears of sadness for John's absence, but also of joy for the certainty that her pain had transformed into salvation for other families. That afternoon, as she watched the bustling activity of the hospital from her office window, Mary thought about how unpredictable life was. 3 months ago, she was an invisible janitor, a widow struggling to support her daughter. Today, she was a respected professional whose experience and intuition regularly saved lives. But the biggest change wasn't professional. It was the certainty that John had not died in vain. His terrible death had become the seed of something that would protect countless families in the future. And that, Mary thought, was the most beautiful way to honor his memory. When she got home that day, she found Isabella doing her homework at the kitchen table. The girl looked up and smiled. "Hi, Mom. How was work today?" "We saved another life," Mary replied, kissing her daughter's forehead. "That's good," Isabella said simply, returning to her studies, and Mary realized that was the perfect answer. For a child who grew up knowing that saving lives was her mother's job, nothing could be more natural. John was gone, but he had left behind a daughter who would grow up knowing that every person has value, that every voice matters, and that even the most terrible tragedies can be transformed into the strength to protect others. That was how love continued, even after the loved one was gone. That was how tears turned into hope. And that was how a simple janitor had become the guardian of her husband's memory and the protector of families she didn't even know. In the end, Mary had discovered that being invisible to others didn't mean being insignificant. It just meant they hadn't learned how to see yet. And now, thanks to her, many people were learning to see what truly mattered. The humanity behind every uniform, the experience behind every observation, and the love that moves an ordinary person to do extraordinary things.